Okay. Believe we are live now. So thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Francesca Dubrock and I'm the Chief Curator here at the Anchorage Museum. The Anchorage Museum is situated on Dena'ina homeland, and I would like to offer gratitude for centuries of Dena'ina care and for their ongoing leadership and stewardship of these lands and waters. In October, we opened How to Survive, an exhibition that considers the idea of survival through hope and care and asks how gestures and practices of love, protection, nurturing, and sharing can help us face the climate crisis. We are lucky to be joined by two extraordinary artists in the show, Nicole McLaughlin and Jessie French. Both artists consider care for the planet and communities as foundational aspects of their artistic and design practices. We are also happy to present this conversation as part of the 2024 Anchorage Museum Design Week, a gathering of perspectives, expertise, and inspirations in design geared towards positive impacts in local and global communities. So each artist / designer is going to share about their work, and then we're going to have about 20 to 30 minutes at the end of the presentation for dialogue and questions. So if you have questions for Jessie or Nicole, please type them in the chat. These sessions are really intended as kind of informal spaces for sharing and dialogue. So anything you'd like to know, please don't be shy. I'm going to introduce the artists now and then turn it over to them to give their presentations. So Nicole McLaughlin is a multidisciplinary designer. Since 2018, Nicole has explored greater possibilities for sustainability through self-initiated and collaborative efforts. While sustainability is often used as marketing buzzword because of its PR value, Nicole's accessible, witty, and functional practice serves as a reminder that sustainability is actually an operational philosophy. By transforming discarded miscellanea into objects with new, imaginative, and often unexpected utility, Nicole shows how a circular approach to design and manufacturing can help us reframe waste as an opportunity. Jessie French. In an era of uncertainty, Jessie French's practice stands as a vital intervention, reimagining our relationship with the environment and technology. Her specialization in algae-based plastics, resonating with the origins of petrochemicals, fosters a unique dialogue with materials, blending ancient elements with innovative environmental solutions. French's works, echoing patterns of distant oceans and atmospheres, inspire reflection on our connection to natural systems. Her melding of traditional craftsmanship with modern materials highlights her commitment to ecological concerns while pioneering new narratives in artistic materials and techniques. So I'm really thrilled to have these two artists with us today, and I can't wait to hear more from them. So with that, I will turn it over to Nicole.
Okay, I think I didn't want to start with this muted. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole McLaughlin, and I'm an upcycling designer, and I'm just going to pull up my presentation and we'll get started. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be speaking with you today. This is a topic that is very important to me and something that I have based my career off of, but it's also just a passion of mine. So happy to be speaking about it. So here's me. And this is kind of what my life sort of just looks like nowadays. A lot of rummaging through used materials and gathering supplies throughout my house, but then also the world around me. Um, and I'm based in Boulder, Colorado, so I spend a lot of time outdoors. I was living in New York and Boston for a couple of years, and being based in cities, I don't think I always realized the importance of connecting with nature and how much more nature has been able to show me why sustainability is so important and why it's the foundation of everything that I do. But I want to take you back to when I started doing this, which was about 2017. I decided that I wanted to take leftover materials, mostly packaging and things that I was finding around my house, and turning them into new things. And the reason why I started doing this was because I was working within the fashion industry as a graphic designer, and I was design and graphics that were being put on clothing. But that really got me thinking more about this and this structure of how the fashion industry goes. And a lot of the time, it's just the linear economy where you create something, it's used, and then it's thrown away. And I would be working in this office, and there'd be boxes and boxes of half pairs of shoes and swatches and samples and things that were just getting thrown away. And so I took it upon myself to go rummaging through and pulling things out and seeing what I can make with them. And so they started with footwear shapes. And so I was taking jackets or, like I said, packaging, sporting equipment, and trying to find ways of shaping them and molding them to my feet or to my body. And I started to see some really interesting things, and I was having such a good time doing it. And all the while, I was still working at this company. And so I think I felt this confliction of, I'm part of the problem by helping them produce so much, but also at the same time, like I could see the possibilities of what these pieces could be. Going into thrift stores, finding, used gear, things that people were throwing away, or even just looking in my own closet at things that I maybe had for a while. I wasn't necessarily using them anymore. What can I turn them into? And this really got me thinking about the rest of the fashion industry, because I was like, I work in one company in this huge, huge industry, and this one company has all this waste. What about the other companies? And we think a lot about the end of waste, where it's like, okay, the consumer is left with all this stuff. What do we do with it? Where do we put it? But I don't think people always realize how much is in those offices themselves and like the start of the process. So I left that job and decided to go be a resource for the rest of the fashion industry. So I'll partner with different brands to take their samples. So as an example here, these are random half pairs of goalie soccer gloves. So you need two of them. These were all left over as ones. They were samples, so they might have been, not fully finished, or they were sub-material, or they weren't correct, so they couldn't sell them. They can't donate them. So they are left with all this stuff. And so brands are very willing to send it to me, which I was really grateful for, so I can make pieces like this. And so taking all these used items or leftover samples and turning them into new things. But then it started to be like, I am only one person, and there's all these industries and all these brands that are trying to send me things. So I decided to then connect with students, with universities, to try to share the wealth, to take materials. So like this was an example from a Coachtopia project. There was all this scrap leather that was coming from bags. I got maybe like 4 or 5 boxes of these scrap leather samples. I only needed 2 of them to make this project, and then we would go off to donate them to like an FIT, a Parsons, Pratt, any design schools that would take them. So it's a really cool opportunity for me to be able to share the wealth. I really enjoy doing that. And then just a little bit about my process. I mentioned it before, but I really started off by taking material and putting it onto my body and seeing the shapes that come out of it. It's a very fluid process. I don't really force anything. It just sort of happens, and I love to see where it takes me. Sometimes I'll be creating a shoe, not working out, it becomes a hat, or vice versa, and I love the way that that just keeps me going. Um, and this is a good example of my like the process itself is basically ongoing. So the final piece I consider to be the photo. I don't have a big archive or gallery of all the pieces I've made. I actually will take them apart and start to use them for other things. So it's kind of just a constant rotation. So I don't really keep anything in that way, where I don't keep it to be like as it is made, but I will take the material and I'll keep using it over and over again. And I think that it just shows me how much is possible and how far material could be pushed. I also love utility. I try to always bring it into my pieces. So creating function and creating pieces that serve multi-purposes, or maybe sometimes it's overly functional and like over the top, just to be able to get inspiration and maybe bring it back in. And I also love to have fun. I think that's a really big important thing. For me personally, I think playing and trying things and failing is a big part of what I do. But I also think the broader conversation of sustainability is a tough subject. I think there's a lot of dread and could be a kind of a dark place. And so I try to make it inviting. I try to make it fun and get people, especially young people, excited about it because I don't think it has to be boring. I think you could have a lot of fun with it. I also use food quite a bit in my work, and this was a really cool challenge for me because no material for me is off limits, and I always try to use everything as best I can. And so food waste is a super important thing to me. So making sure that I'm able to use anything that I'm buying or making, I don't like wasting. So this was a cool opportunity for me to be able to learn how to use food in a way that I could still eat it after. So I can't sew it. I can't really use glue on it. So I found ways of using bread to like and creating internal structures with like rope and toothpicks and things that I could take out, and then I can enjoy a nice lunch after. So win-win. And then I started to look into the more explorations of furniture and homewares as well. So kind of expanding out of the typical fashion space, but finding ways of bringing these materials into other objects. I think that there's a lot of possibility for me in this space. I'm still fairly new to it, but I really enjoy the challenge of creating larger scales or working with less malleable materials. So that's something for me in the future to keep your eye out for. If you're interested in this, you might see me get more into the furniture space. And then I just want to quickly talk about my Alaska exhibition that I had. So about a year ago, I had the opportunity to come to Anchorage and spend quite a few days just really enjoying the town. I got to spend a ton of time in the museum itself, and it's such an amazing place. And for all of you that are there and get to experience it, I think it's just such a amazing place for inspiration, but also just history and discovering new artists. And so I had such a wonderful time there, and I got to see, here we go, there's some action there. Got to see a moose, I got to see the Northern Lights, and I was there for Ferrandi, so I got the full experience, and I had honestly the greatest time. So while I was there, I spent quite a bit of time rummaging through the back side of the museum, pulling out past exhibition materials, things that make the museum what it is, and thankfully, they let me rummage and pick out things that I could use for my part of the How to Survive exhibition. So pulling out different things like tarps. There was some pilot material, which I thought was cool. There was a ghillie suit, interesting nylons, different fabrics. And so I came back with a big box back to my studio in Colorado and created my pieces that are on display now at the museum. So here's a couple of them. Got really inspired by the fishing culture that you have there, just the camping, the nature of the outdoors. I really wanted to bring that into my work. And so here it is. Please take it all in for me. I haven't seen it in person, but I've seen the pictures, and I am just so proud and happy to be a part of this wonderful exhibition. Thank you for having me a part of it. And lastly, I just want to talk about my connection now with companies and how this has expanded. So I was showing maybe more of those personal one-of-one projects, but now being able to come back to brands and showing them the possibility of doing upcycling at scale. And this is something that I've learned a lot about in the more recent years, is how it's easy for me to say, like, I could take material and I could make one-of-ones in my studio all day long, but it's a lot harder for these bigger companies to do the same practices. So I think it's really important for me and for people to challenge these brands and these bigger corporations to do better and to really take, you know, take these pieces that they've made and take responsibility for them. So the that it's not on the consumers, it's on them to be able to figure out the waste stream. So this is an exploration that I have coming out this year, which I'm really excited about. And this is all upcycled, a fully upcycled shoe. It's a reground sole, and these are all scrap pieces from either it's waste fabric or shoes that were brought back in, disassembled, and recreated into a new shoe. So this is a really proud moment for me coming this year, because I went from one of one's shoes to being able to create. It's not a ton, it's only 500, but that's still a lot more than what I usually make. So I'm pretty proud to say that we were able to get that done. And lastly, just talking about my workshops. So I think education has been a really big part of what I do, and teaching the next generation of sewers and people who are interested in designing that upcycling is a great opportunity to learn and a great opportunity to just mend things or use things that you already own. It's such a great skill to be able to hem a pant or, to make a change on an item of clothing that you own. So I encourage everybody to learn how to sew. And if you are around and you would love to do one of my workshops, I always have them throughout the year, and I would love to have you be a part of it. So that's all for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole. That was wonderful. I love that you had the action of the moose eating, moving his
I
lips.
had to show it. I just thought it was so cool.
That's great. So Jessie, I think we're ready to move to your presentation.
Can you see that one?
Yes,
cool.
we can.
So yeah, I'm gonna first I want to just acknowledge that Australia is a country that was invaded relatively recently. Unfortunately, there's been some more recent ones, but I live and work on the land of the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people, and that I'm presenting from Bunurong country today. But also that these are some of the longest human histories that we have on Earth. So I feel really lucky to be able to learn and share the space with the people that have these longer cultures. The reason why I got into this is because we've got a really big problem with plastic waste in particular. So these are just some stats, but recycling is not really an ultimate solution, particularly for petrochemical plastics. Only around 9% are recycled, and then it's really important to think about that process as being an industrial one and quite an energy rich one. But also, I'm not sure what your waste streams are, but in Australia, the process is that we basically kind of put our household waste into bins, and then it's collected by trucks, but then it's actually sent overseas. So in 2019, China was where we were sending it, but they stopped accepting it. So now it's going to kind of other parts of the South. I think Indonesia is where a lot of it goes. And there's quite informal kind of systems. A lot of the sorting is done by hand, and as the labor costs rise, which is, a great thing, where you have wages increasing, they also become more expensive. So then it's even within Indonesia, it's being kind of shipped between islands. And a lot of that still ends up in informal waste streams, which essentially end up in the water. And I was actually hanging out with a friend of mine who's a traditional owner from Northeast Arnhem Land. And because of the tides, a lot of that actually ends up back in native lands in Australia. So waste streams are a problem. Unfortunately, when plastic degrades, it splits apart into really, really small pieces, and that doesn't really degrade into nothing. It ends up being kind of taken back into even our bloodstream. So it's been found everywhere. It's in the Marinara Trench, and it's on the highest mountains in the world. But there's also these bigger issues about the concerns that some plastics, particularly even like PVCs that carry the water that we drink from, have this ability to attract and accumulate the toxins that are in the earth, different pesticides and things like that. So that's some doom and gloom, and that's why I've got into doing what I'm doing. This is a little insight into kind of how I make the material. But yeah, it's essentially cooked. I'm going to go through a little bit of that, and then a little bit of my work, and then we can have some questions after that. So the fossils that are in fossil fuels are actually algae. So the algae that we're using are really ancient life forms, and they're being turned into things that are disposable. But I think what is something that I like to reflect on, is just the reverence that we kind of should have for these things that are very old, but also that there's a solution in new algae, which can be really sustainable. They can be farmed in a way that's renewable, but then they can also be reusable. So the plastics I make are safe enough to eat. They can be reformed into new items in a non-industrial process. So it's one that you can do in a pot, similar to kind of making pasta at home. They're biodegradable and they are compostable, also in a home compost. And if they are discarded, they are taken up by the ecosystem. So they can actually become a fertilizer, or essentially if they end up back in the ocean, they'll be eaten there too. This is a picture of a material little strip, and that's basically how it is degraded as part of that remaking process. So it's degraded by hydration, and then it essentially just will kind of dissolve back into the water. And then if that water concentration is brought back down again, it can then be poured out as a liquid. It sets into a gel, and then I dry it, and you end up with the plastic material like that. This is always a really good question to answer, because not everyone knows what an algae is. It is the same as seaweed. An algae is just the overarching term that's used for any plant that grows in the water that can perform photosynthesis. And in fact, the DNA of the really, really ancient, the algae that are the fossils in the fossil fuels, their DNA is actually within every cell of every plant that can perform photosynthesis. They are the beginning of oxygen on the planet. I also like to address this question of what is a plastic, because a plastic is really in our common speech, it's petrochemical plastic, and really a plastic is any material that can be formed. So there are naturally occurring polymers, such as the ones that I use, but I think it's also really, really important to kind of acknowledge that when we're talking about petrochemical plastics, we're also talking about hundreds of thousands of different materials that all have different mechanical properties, aesthetic properties, and like streams of how they're recycled or not recycled, and different levels of toxicity. The other reason why I got to doing this is because essentially kind of we're thinking about what we are doing and why we're doing it, thinking about a need for a different future. And something I always kind of use to guide my practice is these statements. One of them is that the past is always with us and the future never is. And I think that's important to frame. I think sometimes futuristic work can forget why we're actually doing this and why we need to think about a new future. And also to think about the fact that like the future is something that we can never get to, that we really need to be in the present, and we need to learn from the past as well. The other one is that it matters what ideas you use to think other ideas with. And I find this really, really helpful to deconstruct, I guess, the history of knowledge, particularly in Western canons, and think about like how we really ended up here, and break down and kind of question the systems that we currently exist in. So this is me in my studio. This is where I am right now. You can see that it kind of looks like a workshop. It kind of looks like a kitchen. It doesn't really look like many other art studios, but my process is very like cooking. The beginning of my work really started with supply chain research, because I think when you're dealing with materials and you're dealing with kind of trying to find a solution for a problematic material, that's really important. So the beginning of this part of my practice started in early 2020. I went to Morocco, which is where most of the world's agar comes from. So that's my hand. That's a little piece of gelidium, which is a red algae or a seaweed. Seaweeds are used to kind of refer to like macroalgae. So they're the ones you can kind of see and touch and feel. They're big. Microalgae are the ones that you can't really see with your naked eye. So yeah, I did a lot of research there into the supply chains. And it was a beautiful place to go because one, I had read in the scientific literature that there had been issues linked to supply chain overharvesting. I wasn't I wasn't too optimistic about what I would find in Morocco, but I was really, really pleasantly surprised that this company, Set Exam, which supplies more than half the world's agar, is a family-run third-generation business. It was started by and still run by marine biologists, and they have a monopoly on the market, which also means that they have a completely vested interest in maintaining the health of their harvesting sites. And so in 2014, when I had read about these overharvesting issues, it was actually when they were bringing in these really strict controls. So a little bit about this. This is kind of how it is harvested sometimes in the intertidal zone. It's often women that are collecting the seaweed there. There's also dives, but the dives are really, really tightly controlled to make sure that they're sustainable. This is the seaweed. It's basically dried and washed of the salt and sand, and then it goes into a big vat. It's very similar to kind of making a chicken stock or something, where you put it all in the pot, you cook it up for a little bit, and then essentially you like take out the solids and leave the liquid, and it just gets dehydrated down into a fine kind of film on the bottom, and then that's ground into a powder. These are the lab techs, and this is what it's looked like when they're testing it. This is more for your bacteriological agars, which I should say are like the same thing that you find in the bottom of petri dishes. But agar and what I use as the polymer is also used in food really widely, so you might have come across it. I'm just going to go through a little bit of my work to give you a rundown. I know we're heading towards the end of the time, but this is kind of where the work in Morocco got to. The live cooking has always been a recurring theme through my process. I think that meeting of showing the production is really, really a big part of my practice. But also starting to make these materials and look at what is in them. They have these really incredible ways of, oh, this is my desk in lockdown, actually. So this is microalgae. Sorry, I diverged a little bit. This is that same microalgae that the petrochemicals are made of. You might have come across this in food as well. This is a freshwater variety of spirulina. It makes the most nutrient-dense food on Earth, but I also use it as a pigment. So you can see here, this is some molded vessels that I made in kind of 2020 and 2021. These were really about linking that idea of the production site that could be in the home with this idea of consumption and a little bit of a play on words. So the dark color that you see there is actually that microalgae. And I use that throughout my work as, almost like a metaphysical, like a spirit guide. But, in reality, I think it's linking back to these, what are really ancient ancestors, whose bodies are used to make, throwaway items like pens and wrappers. But I use them in my work to kind of, honor them, but also to have them as a spirit that's coming down. There's often I'm just going to find one. There's often, these figures in my work I really see as, these ancestral kind of beings coming down to be there to remind us that we've only been here a little bit of time and that we can change what we're doing. I'll go back a little bit. So this is on-site making. This was the Sydney Biennale, and I really was using this as a space to show people how it can be done, but also bring people into the process of production. Some microalgae again, some big installations, again, these figures, topographical kind of figurative work showing, you can see natural systems in them. This is some work that I have been doing with a chef who works with fermentation, but these are vessels that you could actually eat from. And I've been doing quite a bit of work with Adam and Arc'teryx as a concept for like trail vessels, where you can kind of eat a meal and then you can put your vessel in a pot and melt it back down and actually like drink that broth. Some more artistic work. And then this is kind of, I guess, how those vessels end up used in everyday life around the studio, but also in other people's lives. I've beginning to kind of reach out into education. So I've been working with schools a lot in the last year. And we've been doing different making workshops, and kids have been incredible. This is high school students here in Melbourne. They made their own material, and then we made a bunch of vessels and some artworks with all of the things that they made. Another part of my practice is this design side called Other Matter. So Other Matter is, I guess, the adjacent studio that I have to my artistic practice that is really I guess, the home for applied or shared accessibility to the work. So in this show, you can see my artwork kind of in the space, but then the decal signage was also made of the material. And that's something that I've always really wanted to do is think about, the work as, both a work, but then as also something that can be a working kind of walking the walk of the practice to really bring it into the real life and replace some problematic materials. So this is some work that is in Aesop stores in Australia and New Zealand at the moment. There's a kind of an artistic installation, but I just wanted to point out, like, these lettering down here, this is also my material. So it's functioning now as a really effective way to replace signage. This commission is really beautiful because it's kind of a melding of my artistic practice and also this applied arm. I think that's it. We'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Jessie. That was wonderful. I'm super inspired by everything you both shared. So for those listening in online and live at the Seed Lab, we're happy to take questions as you have them. So I'll keep my eye on the chat here. And as we wait for folks to think of their questions, I'll just dive in with some of my own. So I guess one thing I wanted to ask, since you both are kind of cusping into this new territory, Jessie, where you're doing the window treatments, which is really exciting because I remember when we first spoke probably a year ago. Now time is a blur for me, but you were wanting to think about applications for vinyl graphics, but kind of hadn't quite gotten there yet. So I've been really excited seeing on your social channels that that's come to fruition, and I want to figure out how museums could potentially get their hands on this stuff. And then Nicole, where you're kind of veering into this space where you're working with brands and larger scale production to produce things that are created from all like scrap and reused material. So I'm curious, that brings your work into these sort of new spheres and new contact zones for viewers and consumers to encounter your work and sort of learn something about it. So I'm just curious how you think about the messaging of your work, talking amongst these different audiences, and how you see sort of the value of kind of taking your work from this kind of like smaller bespoke or like studio practice into the more commercials, maybe not the right word, but the broader realm where you're working with a company that might have a broader consumer reach.
Yeah, I mean, I can take it first, Jessie, if that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I think it's been like, I think I said that where it's like, it's a lot easier for me as an individual to say, do everything fully upcycled, like do it the right way, and convincing a giant company that might have been doing something a certain way for a long time is challenging. So I'm taking it in strides and doing small projects where it's like, you can show them the value of material that otherwise would have been wasted. So a lot of the time, this is where I found out where cheaper for them to get rid of stuff and than it is to make new. And like that's such a heart-wrenching thing because it's like you've already spent all the resources and the time to make these things. Like, why not keep it going? But a lot of the time it's more challenging finding like a warehouse to store it in. Then when it's being stored, is it like maintaining the best quality, like all these things. So it's finding ways to do it small, do it locally. I think that's been the biggest thing is like how can we find resources within the US and, you know, different parts of the world that you can target, do smaller runs, find ways of creating these more prototype pieces and then build up the scale. And so they all seem, I mean, all the brands at least that I've been starting to work with seem really interested in it. I think that their goals, like the timeline is like way too far for my personal liking. So I'm just trying to like streamline it the best I can. I want it to do it the right way the first time and not, you know, not do it too quickly, but at the same time, it's like we don't really have that much time to just be wasting. And there's so much stuff that like is not being used and every day is just getting trashed. So I think it's just really giving a blueprint is the way that I find that I personally am like, okay, this is one small scale thing. What's the next step? And then what's the next step from that?
Yeah, I think it's been, I guess, something that my work in this space started as this artistic project to envision what like a post-petrochemical world would look like, but the success of the material really made me feel responsible for making it accessible on a wider scale. So yeah, this year I have put in a patent application, and so now I'm going down that road. And yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that I can one day, you know, spread it wide and far, and like this can be the new way that signage happens. But also that, you know, it's really just a material, and materials can be applied in so many different ways. When you're upscaling, I think, you know, particularly in this, when you're trying to make a circular material work, we're really coming up against some imperfect economic kind of constraints. Melvin Bragg, who has that beautiful podcast In Our Time, has this remark where he's just like, we don't pay the proper price for plastic. And I think that's the problem. You know, we don't pay the price that real estate takes up forever. We don't pay the price that, you know, these recycling systems that we pay through our council taxes, you know, we're paying that price. Like the producers don't pay that price. The retail customers don't pay that price. So I think we're in an exciting time where there is starting to be prices put on that kind of thing, and that economic model is slightly changing. I know a lot of governments are working on, you know, intergovernmental workforces. Europe is really leading the way in kind of getting rid of single-use plastics, and there are bans coming in on that, and lots of taxes and things. So slowly that's changing, but we are still left with those infrastructure costs, like Nicole was mentioning, you know, warehousing space. There's also like labor costs. And it's been interesting doing this first commercial application of the decals because, you know, they all come back to my studio to be recycled, and then we're going to be doing a new campaign. So the idea is that I'll kind of melt those ones down, and then we'll make the next ones. But it's very labor intensive. So what I'm doing now is really trying to think about how to nut that out, how to build these forms so that the systems are really there for the material to work as it scales. And that's a new challenge. You know, there's material challenges that I think I've solved to a point, but then there's, you know, the system design comes into it. And I think that's really a bigger challenge, and something that I'm trying to solve as I go.
That's wonderful. You know, I think that was something that we came up against at the museum, thinking about this exhibition too, how to survive. It was partially about the content of the exhibition and the artists we wanted to work with, but it was also really intentionally an exercise for us to inventory our own processes of making exhibitions and putting things together and to try things, to do things differently and to work with artists long distance and eliminate some of those long distance loans, and to think about the materials we use in production and fabrication. And we found that oftentimes when we think about sustainability, we don't think of sort of the human side of it. And like you were saying, the labor of melting down the decals and producing new ones. And so that there's all these different variables to consider beyond the material ones. So I'm curious to hear you each maybe speak a little bit about the idea of sustainability within your practice. What would it mean to you to have a sustainable design practice or art practice? And that, I hope, like, in your answers, you'll consider things that go beyond, just the sort of actual physical carbon costs or output of your studio, but other things like, time to be with your families, or, ability to have a whole life where you're feeling, like you have the opportunities to teach and have these more kind of personal relationships while also maintaining a really high standard of production on the designer art side.
Yeah, I'll go first if that's cool. Yeah, that's been a huge challenge. I think I have no team, it's just me. So I'm a solo practitioner, and I'm also a mother. So I created a very advanced piece of biomaterial a couple of years ago. So it is a challenge. And I think as designers, you have to be piecemeal. Like, it's hard up against us, where there's plastic everywhere. Like, I'm not trying to immediately have a fix for everything. That would be completely like amazing if someone could do that. But I think, you just have to take it one thing at a time, and be sustainable in your ambition and your, like, what you can actually do. And I think through that, you're able to work out what you can have power in, especially when you're doing something that is kind of novel and innovative and people want to work with you. Something that I've been doing is, like, I have really strict like environmental and ethical riders as part of my contracts usually. So I use these particularly with big brands that I work with, but also with new collaborations. So often I will, depending on the context, like, push back on people and ask for there to be, like, Indigenous representation on the team, or basic diversity as a start. But I think even if your practice is not particularly focused on sustainability, you can implement these things. Like, you can have that power. Even if you work within a company, you can negotiate these things in your contract. And yeah, I mean, don't put too much pressure on yourself. You still have to help yourself before you can help others. Like, I think that's really important. Yeah.
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, I think that's a good call out. It's really hard to make big change in the world if you're not, like, feeling good about you or your surroundings. So, I mean, personally, I think making the move to be closer to the outdoors has been really eye-opening for me, being able to have a garden and to be able to compost my food and feel like I could bike to work and not be biking in New York City and risk my life every day. No, I think just having those types of, like, lifestyle opportunities is such a privilege, and for me to be able to learn and take from those and to be able to apply those to my work, but knowing that not everybody is in the same position. So how do you make this more accessible? How do you, like, lessen? I think we all feel this, like, sense of guilt, and I think that's such a bad feeling. I mean, I know I feel it really often, like, when I'm traveling or when I'm doing things, like, it just feels, something about it feels icky, it feels wasteful. But at the same time, I then, am working with these big companies, and it's like I see what they're doing, and I'm kind of just like, why do we feel the guilt as individuals? And I think it's positive guilt. It pushes us to do better, but I also think, you know, legislation's super important. Pushing back, not buying from companies that you don't agree with. I think that's really important. So making those types of changes for yourself, like lifestyle changes, but also like putting your money where your mouth is, and then also, you know, doing the best you can every day. I think that's really the best you could do.
Yeah, I think Jessie, you put it nicely, and I think very politely, thinking about the imperfect economic systems which we are working within. And I think there's a lot more you could say about that. And I think that's well taken, Nicole, that you know, I think there's a lot of self-flagellating, which is intentional, part of the agenda to pass that responsibility on to the individual. So one thing that resonated for me when you were talking, I love, Jessie, when you said it matters what ideas you use to think other ideas with. And it echoes a quote I just heard last week from another participant in the exhibition, quoting a Sami scholar, Eva Nylander, who said, it's time to learn how to learn. And so thinking about learning, I'm just curious to hear you talk a little bit about like the ways you have learned to do this work. It seems like play and experimentation have been big through lines for both of you, but I'm curious to hear you comment on anything that you feel like you had to unlearn to make what you're doing now, and how you approach like the idea of learning in the teaching that you both do, which seems really important to both of your practices. And it's something that I really admire that you're both involved in.
Do you mind if I take this? I was gonna say, yeah, that idea that it matters what ideas you use to think other ideas with. It comes from Marilyn Strathern, who's a really beautiful philosopher of science. Yeah, no, yeah, maybe. Anyway, comes from Marilyn Strathern, and she has some really beautiful ideas around that. But I guess what informs my practice a lot is that I studied history of science, and through that, I guess a history of knowledge building. And what is also really important is that when you're talking about history of anything, you're really talking about like the Western history of anything, but they forget to put that bit in. But, you know, through that, I think what is also been really enlightening is just that, like, particularly in the history of like scientific discovery, that really there was a lot of links even to like Copernicus. You know, there was like, he was living in some guy's house that had this library of like Arab literature, and there was also like this discovery that was made, you know, through that literature a long time before. And, you know, what we end up with is remembering this name, but when you actually trace through what happened there, it becomes quite obvious that those ideas already existed, just in different, you know, parts of the world. But also that, you know, knowledge is really quite often exists beforehand, or, you know, we build ideas from other ideas, and, you know, the idea of discovery or something new is rarely the actual accuracy of the situation. But also that, you know, when we're thinking about why we're doing these things, there's often a precursor. So, you know, materials are, this material that I'm making is, you know, there's nothing new or futuristic about it. It's probably existed before. And I think that's also a really important thing to consider.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice takeaway. And I feel connected to what you said too. It's like not like the history is not like that's not it's Western. It is, because when you think about footwear, and like that's the space that I'm in. Like the things that I learn the most from is going to museums and seeing indigenous footwear, and seeing, you know, First Nations creating footwear, and what we're interpreting that now, and like the way that we've ended up making footwear and how much is being made. I think it just always recalibrates me, and like how much we have versus how much we need. And so that's something that I'm personally learning is, quantities and how much consuming, we are all instilled to do. Something I really took away from in when I was working at the company was going to the factories themselves and, the US perception of where our clothes are made versus how it actually is made. And the people that are making it are experts at what they do. And I think that it's not humanized enough. And that's something that really bothers me is we could be learning so much from each other and learning techniques and how to make things better, faster, with better materials, yet we kind of have blinders to those things. So that's just something that I've just wanted to add in, but also learning every day is really important for me. I have a lot of fun just trying things, tinkering and making, and I think it's important for everyone to have those experiences and just trying to make things yourself and see how you do, but learning from other people is really important.
That's great. Thank you both. There are some questions coming in the chat, and I wanted to encourage others because we have about 10 minutes left. If you have questions to ask, there are some specific questions, Jessie, about the vinyl alternative, like signage, just about how you're thinking about manufacturing this at scale in the future, and somebody specifically wanting to know if they can buy it yet.
Yeah, it's the scaling up is something that I am prototyping at the moment. So at the moment, it's all handmade here in my studio. And yeah, what I'm kind of working on now is again like those systems of how it can be upscaled and how it can be shared. But at the moment, I make it. You can get in touch with me if you want to do it. I'm doing kind of early industry trials with really selective partners. But yeah, get in touch with me. I'm gonna be launching like an EOI later this year for projects. But at the moment, yeah, just email me. But I guess that's part of it. It is at a stage where it's all handmade here. But yeah, next step is to nut out how it's done. And yeah, that's still kind of secret.
That's great. So I'm gonna ask just kind of a big kind of concluding question here. And while folks maybe bring their last questions to us, but you are artists who are also daughters, sisters, parents, teachers. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what your relationship, the role that your relationship to past and future generations plays in your practice and your thinking. And Jessie, you touched on that a little bit as well. And in addition to that, sort of what gives you hope for the future? What are you seeing now, or what do you think about that gives you hope for the future?
I can go. I think recently becoming an aunt was a really big thing for me. Having the opportunity to see my sister become a mom was huge. And I always just look at that baby and I'm like, I want there to be a better opportunity, a better world for her. So it always puts a little bit of like gusto into me now every day to think about that. But for me, I think the workshops and teaching has been really like the biggest eye opener. It's my opportunity to see people discover the possibilities of reworking and upcycling. I get a chance to see it's almost like the feeling that I got when I first started to do it and like that discovery feeling. I get to see that every single time and almost relive that. And it just gives me hope that people also get really excited about that. So I feel optimistic. I think working with the students makes me optimistic. They're always coming up with really interesting concepts and things I've never even considered. So there's still a lot to be designed and a lot to be done. And yeah, I think that's definitely like the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, I think I find hope in I guess it's so amazing to see the work starting to kind of take on this really practical applied way that it could I can see this path for actually replacing some petrochemicals, and I see policy happening around the world as well. I think there's hope in that kind of, I guess, economic recognition that the way we're doing things is becoming more and more expensive, particularly as, unfortunately, we're seeing floods and fires and crazy stuff happening in our weather patterns, and sooner than we all thought. So I think I see hope in that, I guess, forcing the hand of the powers that are around us to really make some changes. And also in, Nicole and I have both had the opportunity to work with some big companies. And I think that's the other thing, is that brands are really wanting to do things better and are engaging in this much more. Here in Australia, like funding bodies are now requiring higher standards, as well as consumers and just other individuals. So that really gives me hope for a better future. I think, engaging with people of different pasts and futures is also really important. Becoming a parent myself was really tricky, because it is particularly hard time to bring someone into the world. I know I've, spent most of my breastfeeding time kind of looking at really intense disasters and wars going on, and knowing that, this environmental impact of all of that is crazy. But I also kind of looking to, I guess, particularly here, like spending time with Indigenous people here who have these histories and cultures that extend so far back that they have actually seen climatic change before, and huge change, and still survive and are still resilient, and still hold that knowledge of how to do things better.
Yeah, the exhibition, the How to Survive exhibition, opens with an installation of Alaska Native cultural belongings. They're all, for those of you that are in Anchorage right now, to see it, but they're all items that show things that have been repaired or that have sort of material innovation at their core. And I think that idea that these ideas are here, they have been here, and they will be here in the future, and we don't have to look very far for inspiration in terms of a better way to live, I think is very heartening. Well, we only have 2 minutes left. If anybody has any last minute questions, please quickly get them in the chat. And if not, I will say a big thank you to Jessie and Nicole for being here with us today, and just for sharing with us, and for all of the work that you do. You can feel there's a lot of heart behind what you do, and it's remarkable and it's appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
All right.